Hi, so my name is Brittany Rails, and this is my final project presentation portion for Math 200 Statistics online class. And so basically, I'll just tell you like how I carried out my experiment and things that I thought were cool about it, things that I thought were weird, and show you some of my graphs, and then show you my hypothesis and how all the hypothesis testing and data summary tests went. So my topic for the final project was how many hours do students study per week? And so my null hypothesis was that most of the students will study more than 15 hours per week, including hour 15. So 15 will be on the upper portion and 14 would be on the lower portion, which made my alternative hypothesis that students would study less than 15 hours a week, meaning 14 and below. And so I guess that I just made that assumption because I'm a bio major and like most of my friends are bio majors. So I thought like, oh, we probably study like 30, 40 hours a week. And so however, that ended up not being true, which I'll get into later, but based on my hypothesis testing and my data summary test, my hypothesis was rejected because of insufficient statistical data. So, but how I carried out my experiment, I wanted to get like a wide variety of people. I just didn't want to go ask like clearly all the bio majors, like, oh, how many hours do you study per week? So I wanted to be able to get like a wide variety of people. So I did the easiest thing that I thought to gather the most amount of data, and that was to post a story on my Instagram. And I did one of those polls where it's like, ask me a question, and I did the question, how many hours per week do you study? And then said, like, please answer this for my class. And I ended up getting 43 responses, which I thought was a good data pool to get a wide variety. And these are people replied from Center College, people that go to a community college in my hometown, of course, people from Pikeville. But I also got a lot of majors from where, like, I mean, I hate to admit it, but you don't really know everybody that you're friends with on Instagram. So I got people that I really didn't talk to anymore or haven't ever talked to that replied. So I felt like it just gave me a good way of getting a nice sample with a lot of diverse options of their daily schedules, so it wouldn't be too skewed towards, say, the bio majors or another major that wouldn't study as much. So here's the first graphic that I have to visually represent my data values. On the y-axis, you can see that it's hours per week studied. And on the x-axis, each student has a bar to represent their own response. And it goes 10, 2, 10, 2, 3, 0, 9, and then you see the dark green bar that goes up to 30 and the real maroon bar that goes up to 35, and then some bars that are non-existent where they reported 0. So clearly there's a wide range of data points that I was able to use in order to get proper testing. So here's just another visual representation of my data that I feel like segregates it out more in order to see how correct my hypothesis is, because it separates out those who had 15 hours or more and 14 hours or less. So as you can see, the blue section represents the 15 hours or more. So that's only 23.2%, while those who had 14 hours or less were at 76.7%. So there's clearly a big difference there. And lastly, I don't think I consider this a visual representation, but more so just a chart to more neatly display my data. But in where it says L1, that was my data for those who studied 15 hours or more. And then my L2 in my calculator was those who studied 14 hours or less. So to complete this chart, I used a combination of 2SAMP t-test on my calculator and Excel. I used Excel to achieve my modes and my medians, while I used my calculator to achieve the p-values, the degrees of freedom, the standard deviations, things like that. I just find it more efficient for myself. I understand the programs better using them in that way. So for this project, I ended up with a p-value of 1.42. My level of significance was 0.05, and because 1.42 is much greater than 0.05, I conclude that I will reject my null hypothesis due to insufficient statistical data, meaning that the data that I have as evidence doesn't support my original null hypothesis that most of the students will study more than 15 hours a week. And that's also shown by the pie chart and the bar graph. However, in order to have strong statistical evidence, the p-value has to show that, as well as the standard deviations, in which they don't. Therefore, my hypothesis is rejected. My standard deviations, I had for my 14 hours or less portion, I did have much more responses. I had 32 responses compared to 11 for those who studied 15 hours or more. However, my standard deviation was still smaller for those 32 responses. I had a 4.05 standard deviation for my 14 hours or less, even though I had more data values, while for 15 hours or more, I had a standard deviation of 6.50. So overall, I would say that this experiment was a success in a sense of things that I learned, because I had never really heard of a p-value or degrees of freedom before, and I didn't really know how to use standard deviation. So I feel like this whole project was really great. This whole class was really great for learning those types of things. However, I don't really like whenever what I think is going to happen doesn't happen. I just really like to be right all the time. However, I was able to learn through the processes and the calculations of how to calculate whether or not something was statistically correct, and I had to reject my original hypothesis because it wasn't statistically sound, at least not in my experiment. So I thought that it was really great for learning that, and I feel like I learned a lot.